So sure, and if I can, if you don't mind, I'm going to read these two little statements that I wrote
Please.
in preparation, some of which will speak specifically to this, and then we can get into as much of the details as you like. But just to help me stay focused for this august program. Seriously though, seriously, because I know because your work is organized. It did make me think about anyway. Despite arrogantly claiming an expertise in money, what John Hope Bryant actually demonstrated was the effectiveness of imposed propaganda, expertly developed almost a century ago by an array of colonial administrators, specifically the ruling political elite, from Rockefeller to the intelligence community to the military, and most directly the National Association of Manufacturers, who took to a post-World War II need to, in their words, reconquer America for the purposes of the corporate world and capitalism. Their tactics involved establishing a national narrative dominance of market fundamentalism, the idea espoused so well by Bryant that the market can solve everything. And this narrative would eventually combine well with the particular needs of the US government to redefine movements for Black liberation along the safe, acceptable, unthreatening, and entirely constructed idea that Black capitalism or capitalism at all, or any of their various subsets, were the only ways forward. In short, John Hope Bryant took the old white conservative propaganda repackaged for the Black bourgeoisie and spoke it almost word for word, again, arrogantly, and with none of it being data driven, none of it based in actual history or economic theory, and simply regurgitated it verbatim as if it was his own genius. He was loud and wrong. So that's the first statement. The second one, very even shorter, very quickly. Specific to his claim that financial literacy is the civil rights issue of this generation, this is the wisdom of his equally claimed mentor, Andrew Young. To fully understand this would take some time to properly develop, but suffice it to say that Dr. King was targeted by the state for his condemnation of capitalism, which caused him to be at odds with the Andy Young wing of the civil rights movement, a point King made directly to Young into his face specifically, calling him out for being a capitalist when he said, did Dr. King, that I am not. King was assassinated, and those he criticized while alive, specifically the Black bourgeoisie and those like Young, have laid unjust claim to that legacy, have redefined it, and helped foster waves of Bryants who have again accepted corporate logic and repackaged it as Black liberation. So those are sort of the two overarching points that I wanted to just, so specific again to that question of financial literacy. This is exactly, and your work, Erica, has helped me even see it more clearly. I'm not kidding. This specific, because you've identified, at least over the last, I think, 30 years, the font of this projection of financial literacy as that which will solve all of these problems. And if we connect it to this broader history, going back, I mean, what Bryant leaves out of that op-ed is the fact that many things, many things. But the fact that the Freedmen's Bank failed in part, not because of just of the corruption that people like to blame it on in terms of the bank administrators, but because, as Douglas and others, Frederick Douglass and others realize, it can't do what people think it's going to do. You can't take poor people and put money in a bank and have that solve that poverty. That's so he leaves out that entire history. And by the way, he leaves out part of the history as to why Lincoln would have gone in that direction in the first place. The Lincoln who spoke openly about his hostility to Black people, Black equality, who wanted at one point to send Black people back to Africa, one who said he would have left everybody enslaved if that would have saved the Union. This was not because he had some concern. It was always a safety valve against rebellion.
Right.
So Bryant doing this is just a real disrespect to the civil rights struggle, especially to those like King and others who are moving it to the left and who were assassinated, targeted, imprisoned to this day. People are politically imprisoned. Leonard Peltier and others are still in prison because they were moving left of the fakery of capitalism, Black, otherwise, whatever. And we're trying to come up with different ways of addressing this ongoing crisis. So it's really diabolical what he's doing. And why, after all the jokes and the fun I've been trying to have with it and all of that, as you've pointed out, it's a very sad and dangerous logic that he's putting forward, and one that only helps maintain the inequality that we're trying to fix or end.
Yeah, and you made a lot of great points there, but the part that he plays in sort of making this thing seem like this benign, that financial literacy is just doesn't harm us in any way, is the part that hopefully someday we will be able to work through. But even just to go back to the part about civil rights, I just got a basic definition of civil rights
Sure.
from an online dictionary, right? And it talks about, it said from Britannica.com, civil rights are an essential component of democracy. They're guarantees of equal social opportunities and protection under the law, regardless of race, religion, and other characteristics. Examples are the rights to vote, to a fair trial, to government services, and to a public education. In contrast to civil liberties, which are freedoms secured by placing restraints on government, civil rights are secured by positive government action, often in the form of legislation. And unlike human rights or natural rights, in which people acquire rights inherently or perhaps from nature, civil rights must be given and guaranteed by the power of the state. Therefore, they vary greatly over time, culture, and form of government and tend to follow societal trends. So, if we think about this idea of even the notion of civil rights, and civil rights don't just come to us, that there is some sort of a struggle that has to happen for the state to finally say, okay, you can have this thing, you can have this right. We will make this part of our law, make these regulations. How do we balance that against the ideas of somebody like Bryant, who is very pro capitalist, anti business? The government doesn't have any place in this. We don't need government jobs, with all of those things he said. When civil rights, by its definition, requires government intervention and requires some sort of a struggle to get us there. Can you help us to understand this at all?
So what I quickly tried to summarize in those statements is part of that history. So you know Nixon is most famously associated with this, but the he specifically and overtly said, "I want to redefine black struggle along the lines of black capitalist entrepreneurialism and mainstream engagement with the political environment, electoral politics and the political environment." So he was doing that because he was saying explicitly what manufacturers and Rockefellers and intelligence communities have been saying in their own ways for different reasons in with variation. But the point being, we need black people to be consumers, workers, socially distant from us, and relatively quiet. We this civil rights stuff, all this activism and this black power stuff in particular, this really has to be done away with. So rather than well, in addition to, I should say, not rather than, in addition to the assassinations, the incarceration, the infiltration, the counterintelligence program, all of these things, in addition to those things, was this push to this is why Nixon teamed up with James Brown. This is why there's you know other examples that are escaping me. Shaka Khan played a Republican national, but there's always this attempt to bring in some sort of blackness to the right wing to say this is the kind of struggle that's acceptable. Do a business, tell your community that it's not about government involvement, or you don't need oversight, you don't need their intervention, and circulate your dollar, start your business, and you'll be fine. You can catch up. Now, of course, the trick bag in all of this is that they know full well that the government is absolutely necessary in protecting
Yes.
their rights, their interests,
Yeah.
their and so on and so
Yes.
on. And then they leave, leave the rest of us, twisting in the wind. And this is also why, just lastly, again, this dichotomy between King and Andy Young is that King said himself, entrepreneurialism, et cetera, and so forth, black capitalism, he said, buying black specifically, all of this stuff is insufficient. This is a multi-billion-dollar issue. This is a federal government issue. This is a public policy issue. It is public policy that determines where the wealth, how the wealth is defined, how it's developed, and where it goes. And that's what would be necessary to close or end this divide. And to, again, in the name of that struggle, say literally the exact opposite, it's again diabolical. It's frustrating to see it happen, and then as you both pointed out, to see it done with such arrogance and condescension and patriarchy, all that kind of stuff. It was gross. It was really gross on every level.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.